Thank you, Rachel. Welcome everyone to our Federal Policy Update webinar today, focused on the Invest in America Act, the House Transportation and Infrastructure Surface Transportation Bill that was marked up this week. As Rachel said, I'm Tim Drake. I'm the Vice President of Public Policy and Regulatory Affairs here at ITS America. Today, I'll be joined by Ron Thaniel, our Vice President for Legislative Affairs, and Amy Ford, the Director of the Mobility on Demand Alliance. Today, we will provide a summary of the Invest in America Act led by Ron Thaniel. We will hear from Amy Ford about the Mobility on Demand Alliance reaction to the Invest in America Act. And I will provide an update on the FCC's 5.9 gigahertz safety spectrum band proposal. And I think Ron is being held up by a call with staff on the Hill. So if we could jump in, I will give the FCC update, and then we can go back to Ron. We expect he'll be joining us very shortly. So many of you have heard from us before on the Federal Communication Commission's efforts to reallocate 45 megahertz of spectrum in the 5.9 gigahertz safety spectrum band. And the FCC's proposal would give that 45 megahertz over to unlicensed devices. We've been involved in this discussion for quite some time now. The NPRM came out in early February of this year. ITS America submitted comments in early March. We also submitted reply comments when the reply comment period ended in late April. Right now, the FCC is currently reviewing the record established by the comments, the reply comments, and all ex parte filings that have been filed with the Commission in this time. The record is overwhelmingly favorable for our perspective for vehicle to everything technologies. In both the comment period and the reply comment period, those supporting our view in opposition to the FCC's proposal submitted over 85% of both the comments and reply comments. Ex parte filings similarly have come from both sides since the conclusion of the public comment period, and those have focused on a variety of issues, some that were raised in the comments themselves, some are responses to issues raised in the comments, and some are seemingly new ideas and new information. Right now, we expect the FCC is likely to act on the proposal at either its September 30th or October 27th meetings. I would note that there is still an opportunity for the FCC to act on the proposal in July or in early August. They have meetings then as well. But due to the difficulty in this proposal and some of the technical aspects, additionally, the hundreds of comments and reply comments that were filed, we think that it is more likely they would act in September or in October. Next slide. So to give you an update, we've provided updates on this issue at our previous webinars. So I wanted to give you an update of what's happened since then. We've continued to engage with our partners in the transportation industry, Congress, and with the FCC throughout this process. We're working jointly with AASHTO, or partnering with AASHTO regularly, and the Alliance for Automotive Innovation to ensure that transportation stakeholder industry is speaking with a unified voice to the extent possible. We've also implemented a legislative strategy which targets the Senate Commerce Committee. I want to thank our members that have participated in some of those meetings, particularly our automakers and our state DOT members. And we continue to work with the stakeholder coalition that we established to advocate that the full 75 megahertz of spectrum be retained for transportation safety. We're again partnering with the Alliance for Automotive Innovation on this effort, and we're leading a stakeholder coalition letter to Congress. So the first letter that will come out will be to the Senate Commerce Committee, signed by a number of organizations and associations and the stakeholders that we developed starting back in December and January. That letter is timed to go out next week in anticipation of a Senate Commerce FCC oversight hearing that's currently scheduled for the 24th. Additionally, we're working with those stakeholders on efforts to implement a strategy to inform and advocate that the 5.9 gigahertz band be retained with the White House. And we expect that that strategy will be implemented starting in July. Finally, there's also a media and communications aspect to the strategy. We're looking into getting op-eds placed at various markets throughout the country. Additionally, we will be holding a social media day in which many of our stakeholders and we hope many of our members will interact with us in order to raise the profile of this issue. Rachel, is Ron on yet?
Yes, he is.
Great. So I think we can go back to the top and we'll let Ron give us the bulk of our webinar today, which is rightly focused on the big FAST Act reauthorization bill, the Invest in America Act that came out of the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. And Ron, with that, I'll let you take it away. I think you may be on mute, Ron. Looks like we may be having some technical difficulties with Ron's audio. Amy, I don't know if you want to jump in and provide some perspective on the developments with the Invest in America Act and the Mobility on Demand Alliance's efforts, and then when Ron is able to join, we'll get him started.
Thanks, I will. And you know, the interesting part of this is Ron's going to go through and really talk broadly about mobility on demand and where it landed, if you will, in the Invest Act. And really, I think that the biggest piece to focus on right now is twofold. Mobility on demand is in the Invest Act. And that's not a simple statement, actually, because how we added mobility on demand and mobility as a service into the discussions after really a year of long discussions and engagement. And I want to thank really the Mobility on Demand Alliance members and our working group, our policy working group as well, for helping us to frame that conversation. It's really been very productive, it's been insightful, and I think we got very good response in sort of how we engage in talking with folks on the Hill about what mobility on demand is. So Ron will talk you through, when you sort of see our slides there as we go through that, the mobility on demand is included. The definitions of mobility on demand as well as mobility as a service are included in this overall Invest Act. There are a number of different elements that are consistent with some of the policy that we had outlined even last fall, which talked about broadly sort of how do you create transit as the backbone for mobility on demand and how you do include it as part of this definition. How do you increase funding for transit that also facilitates flexible funds that permit innovative services and new partnerships with mobility on demand providers to be able to continue to provide mobility to people and access? How do you think about open data platforms that allow for the exchange of data that facilitates mobility on demand services, but also helps us continue to engage and manage our public right of way, recognizing that that's a complicated issue, but it was one that we felt was important to continue to move forward. And so within all of that, you'll see that the bill itself talks about a federal share for mobility on demand practices out of programs called 53.7, 307, 5310, and 5311. These are the traditional formula funding programs for transit that enables this. You also see MOD included in some of the highway side of the bill that expands eligibility under CMAQ for shared mobility services. And also within the ATC MTD grant, MOD is called out as well. Many of you also saw a call to action that we issued earlier this week. And in the course of the amendments to the Invest Act, there were some changes that more directly impacted mobility on demand. And talking about a couple of the changes, we wanted to flag those for you and for our members. And these are pieces that we're going to continue to be talking about. As this whole process, and Ron will chat with you if and when he gets on, and if not, sort of Tim and I will take sort of doing a summary of all the work that Ron has been staying up like well past midnight to track on what's happening with the bill. But there were several elements that were amended in on the mobility on demand that did change some of the flexibility that we had seen in the original bill. So this is an area that we were trying to focus on here over the last day or two, but then also we'll be having conversations as the bill moves to the floor of the House, but then also some conversations on the Senate side. Things like some definitions in regards to how we look at e-bicycles and scooters, how we continue to ensure that there is a good flexibility in the way MOD rules are written that allow for our transit providers who've made it really clear that flexibility is important in how they extend into these partnerships. How we also look at sort of evolving and emerging MOD services that include automated vehicle services. And this was certainly a big topic in regards to how we ensure that those AV services can be used not just on new services, but how they can also be used to perhaps even, as transit agencies look to create flexibility within the types of services they do, whether they would want to replace a certain line with AV services, et cetera. So these are some of the things that we flagged. You saw it in our call to action when we did flag that. And so we're going to continue to work and reach out to a variety of our different members. And so please stay tuned on that because there are some things that I think that we can continue to expand on how MOD is treated in this. So the upshot is MOD is in, as well as MOS and Mobility as a Service, which we are super thrilled about. And as we want to continue to work forward, we want to make sure that it has the expanded flexibility that enables those programs to really work for our transit agencies the way that they envision. So if we can do this, if we could flip to the beginning slides, I'm going to start taking us through sort of where we are right now on our Invest program and give you a sense of the overall things that we saw happening. Obviously, what Ron was wanting to do, and I'll do this as we continue to get him on, you clearly know that we were moving forward with Fast Track's reauthorization, and it's critically important for us to continue to advance how advanced mobility, intelligent transportation systems, programs like META-X and others are expanded in the flexibility so we not just have safer and smarter, but also greener programs. Next slide. So as we moved forward, I think there are a number of different points that we wanted to be able to convey on what this Invest Act is. And it's fair to say that just even in the markup in the last 200 days, you had upwards of 300 different amendments that were going in. So we are still in the process of coming through and watching and assessing all of the impacts. But the big pieces and the overall wins, and I think I want to emphasize this, and we want to emphasize this, for how technology is treated in the Invest Act, how transportation technology really can help innovate and drive forward our transportation future. So clearly there was a significant increase in funding that was allocated within the Invest Act. This includes not just highway investments, $319 billion a year, but how they also treated transit investments, of which some of the MOD side was a part to that. Highway safety as well as motor carrier safety were also increased significantly. The upshot, nearly a 46% increase over original Fast Act levels. When you also include with what the EPW bill on the Senate side saw, you saw a significant investment in transportation and infrastructure as we move forward. Next slide. So as we continue to think about the Fast Act, I think the important thing is how dramatically it continued to expand the eligibility of intelligent transportation systems in research as well as in deployment. And so while I will not run through every single one of these, I do want to highlight a couple of the different areas I think that not just expanded, but also are new. So obviously it maintained fast-track eligibilities in a number of different programs already existing, whether that be for CMAQ to surface transportation. And Ron, I'll finish this slide and then turn it back over to you. But important to understand when they did that is that they also included vehicle to infrastructure technology, and more importantly, vehicle to pedestrian technology, a very important part of ours from a safety allocation perspective. And so you see that running not just through the ITS programs, but the highway freight program, all the way to CMAQ funding, as well as the surface transportation program. Ron, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about where it expanded ITS eligibilities in our programs.
All right, can we actually go back to the start of my...
Yeah, go back to that slide.
Can you hear me, first of all?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Okay, good. All right. Sorry about that, technical issues today. First of all, I do want to thank you for... Amy, why do I still see your picture, your face? Okay. All right, let's go. All right, so thank you for getting us to this point with the reauthorization in the House. It's been a long week, but I think we've had a lot of success. First of all, I do want to start with this page, which speaks to the larger mission of ITS America and our focus here with the reauthorization. And that is, since the FAST Act was signed into law, automated and connected vehicles have advanced. Big data has become an increasingly valuable tool for decision makers. Electrification of vehicles continues, and mobility on demand services are transforming how we get around in this country. And through the process that we went through last year, led by the Smart Infrastructure Task Force, we developed essentially a key mission, a key focus for the reauthorization. And that is that we support a FAST Act reauthorization that recognizes the added value of integrating technology into transportation infrastructure and services, and provides funding for the rapid deployment of intelligent transportation technologies. Next slide. Okay, so here's the way this is going to work. The next couple of slides will, on the left-hand side, you will see ITSA's policy, and then the main slide, you will actually see the language in the bill, or the policy from the bill. So first of all, Invest in America Act increases FAST Act funding levels by 46%. And it nearly is a $500 billion bill over 5 years. It also includes significant funding for federal highway programs at $319 billion, transit investment at $105 billion, NHTSA at $4.6 billion, FMCSA, motor carrier safety programs at $5.3 billion, and this is a 46% increase over FAST Act levels. Next. Okay, so I think this is where I believe Amy was. So I just want to speak to the way I look at this. We have tremendous amount of opportunities to expand the research and deployment of intelligent transportation technology. So what I did was I looked at the existing eligibilities for technology, in particular ITS, V2I technology. And so the column at the top is essentially a list of existing major programs that allow for technology eligibility. Those programs include CMAQ, you have the Highway Safety Improvement Program, Surface Transportation Program, the National Highway Performance Program, Transportation Infrastructure Finance and Innovation Act, the National Highway Freight Program, Railways Crossing, the Highway Research and Development Program, Technology and Innovation Deployment Program, and Intelligent Transportation Systems Program. Now, below that is expanded eligibility. And this is largely through the new grant programs that are in the Invest in America Act. That includes the Gridlock Reduction Grant, projects of national and regional significance, Community Transportation Investments Grant, Pre-Disaster Mitigation Program, Community Climate Innovation Grants, Carbon Pollution Reduction Program, the new ATC-MTD. I'm going to speak about this in more detail. This is the Safe, Efficient Mobility Through Advanced Technologies Program, Parking for Commercial Motor Vehicles, Pre-Disaster Hazard Mitigation Program, which is the new program. This was a program that was approved through the markup process over the last couple of days. This is from Congressman Garrett Graves of Louisiana, and it has a major technology ITS component to it. Also, another new program that has been offered, that was offered by Congressman Graves, again, Louisiana, and that is a third-party data integration pilot program. So, again, when I look at the success that we have had with new eligibility or expanded eligibility, it is a big win for ITS America. So, let's move on to the next slide. Okay. So, as you know, ITS America has been very focused on the toll that COVID-19 is taking on our states, our cities, our county, transportation agencies, transit, tolling authorities. And so we very much appreciate the fact that the first year provides essentially an emergency assistance program for these transportation agencies. So ITSA's policy, again, on the left-hand side, at least it's on my left-hand side, and that is we support flexible funding to offset the loss in revenues for state, county, and city departments of transportation, transit agencies, and public authorities. So what has happened is the bill provides $8.3 billion in FY21 to ensure states, cities, transit agencies can administer programs, advance projects, and preserve jobs in the aftermath of COVID-19 by extending FY20 enacted levels for the federal highway, transit, and safety programs through FY21. So essentially what is happening here is that, one other point before I get into the details, it provides an additional administrative expenses, provides for additional administrative expenses out of the Highway Trust Fund for the FHWA and NHTSA, and also out of the general fund for FTA. The highway, transit, and safety funds are made available at a 100% federal share to eliminate the need for a match. As you know, most of the transportation programs require at least a 20% match. Some programs require a higher match. This again takes into consideration that, quite frankly, the states and the local transportation agencies and governments just don't have the resources to provide a 20% match. The key point here is the higher funding levels take effect immediately. And again, I want to stress no new policy changes will go into effect for FY21. And the reason behind that is because the way this, again, works is there's a great awareness and appreciation of the toll that COVID-19 is taking on these transportation agencies. And quite frankly, they don't have the resources to put in place new policy this year. So in a nutshell, the bill increases funding for highway and transit programs and puts the delta into a super flexible pot of money for states and transit with broad flexibility. And I keep mentioning the fact that city DOTs and county DOTs are also eligible. What it does is it suballocates the portion of the amount of federal highway funds that are suballocated under the FAST Act, and those dollars are available for the local transportation agencies. It authorizes an additional $14.7 billion for federal highway programs, authorizes an additional $5.7 billion for FTA programs, provides an additional $244 million for NHTSA, provides an additional $209 billion for FMCSA programs. And I do apologize, I have a 5-year-old that I hear very well. I hope you don't hear that, hear my daughter. Let's move to the next slide. Okay, so again, left side, ITSA's policy, increase investments in research and deployment of intelligent transportation technologies. This is a priority. This was a priority of this association throughout our entire FAST Act reauthorization policymaking process. And this bill does just that. It increases funding to $144 million for FY22 through FY25 for the Highway Research and Development Program. And it also, this is a very important point, removes the set-asides that previously took funding away from critical research activities, including the ATCMTD program. It was made over and over clear to us by our research members that while they appreciate the benefits of ATCMTD. That fact that ATCMTD was funded through a number of the core research programs took money away from critical research activities. It adds greenhouse gas emissions reduction to the objectives of the program. I want to point out it's 144 million FY22 through FY25. Under FAST Act, it was provided $125 million on an annual basis. The next program is the Technology and Innovation Deployment Program. It more than doubles funding to 152 million for FY22 to FY25, bringing the total over 5 years to 675 million. This is a lot of money. Part of the reason why it has been doubled is, as you will see later in this presentation, the funding for the new ATCMTD program actually comes from this particular pot, because of course the ATCMTD program is a deployment program, and the thinking of the committee staff is that it makes sense that the funding comes out of this pot. In addition, it does add greenhouse gas emissions reduction to the list of objectives. The funding under the FAST Act was $67 million per year. The next program, of course, is a very important program, and this is the Intelligent Transportation Systems Program. It would receive $100 million on an annual basis for 21 through 25. And this brings the total to 500 million. Now, you may sit back and say, well, this is how much we received in the FAST Act. That is the case. So again, what this does, it removes the set aside in which funding went to the ATCMTD program. So that actually, at the end of the day, increases the overall funding available for this particular program. Very important to ITS America, and that is this program, this bill reauthorizes the ITS Program Advisory Committee. Folks who have followed conversations, in particular with AV legislation, also the fact that the current US DOT does not support advisory committees. ITSA has made a strong effort to make sure that the ITS Program Advisory Committee is preserved. And so this bill does that. So that's another win for us. It does also, as far as the University Transportation Centers program, which is very important, it increases that program to $96 million. And that's another win. It's an increase overall, brings the total to $461.5 million for the UTC program. It establishes a national clearinghouse at a university to research the impacts of automated vehicles, highly automated vehicles, and mobility innovations on land use, urban design, transportation, real estate, accessibility, municipal budgets, and social equity environments. And lastly, on this page, it also directs the US DOT to study how automated vehicles will safely interact with general road users. Okay, next. Yeah, the VMT. ITS America's policy supports expanding the existing state pilot program, and we also support a national vehicle miles travel program. This program nearly doubles funding for state-level VMT pilot programs to 160 million over 5 years, directs program dollars towards implementation of successful state programs. Key to ITS America, we've made a big case for this. It does add cybersecurity to the scope of the pilot program. It also establishes a new 5-year national VMT pilot program funded at 40 million over 5 years. Directs the Secretary of Transportation to make eligible all the 50 states and also the District of Columbia. Next slide. Okay, ITSA policy, increase funding and federal share to 80% for the Advanced Transportation Congestion Management Technologies Deployment Program, support policy that makes a vehicle to pedestrian communications an eligible activity. It does that. It renames the ATCMTD program to the Safe, Efficient Mobility Through Advanced Technology CMAT program. It does prioritize programs that will improve mobility, decrease congestion, increase safety, and reduce emissions. It expands eligible uses of the funds to include, and this is a big one, vehicle to pedestrian technology. We had made a strong push for that. I think ITS America was the only organization in this town pushing to include V2P technology. Also includes vulnerable road user safety systems, and also, of course, a big priority for ITS America. It includes mobility on demand as an eligible activity. It increases funding from 60 million to 60 million per year from the Technology Innovation Deployment Program. We talked about that earlier. And the current funding is 60 million, so it's a slight bump up. It's not the kind of bump that we actually asked for, but in conversations with the committee staff, they point to similar technologies here being eligible under many of the new grant programs. And so I've already mentioned it doubles the funding for the Technology Innovation Deployment Program. Other key point for ITS America, and this is another point because we've heard this over and over from our members, it increases the federal share to 80%. Right now, the federal share is up to 50%. It increases it to 80%. And as I pointed out earlier, there's no longer a set aside in the Highway Research Development Program and also the Intelligent Transportation Systems Program. Funding through FY21 to FY 2025 is $280 million a year. Okay, next slide. Okay, the next one is establish a grant program to invest in alternative fuel vehicle infrastructure. Now, I want to be very clear. I want to credit our automakers on this one. I recall a meeting with our automakers at our office in December 2018 with Sherilyn Batt, our president and CEO, and our automakers put on the table with the direction that they are going, and that is towards alternative fuel vehicles and the fact that the nation is not ready. And so this bill includes $1.4 billion in alternative fuel charging infrastructure, requires electric vehicle charging stations to be usable by the majority of EV drivers and accessible to all members of the public. That is if you receive Title 23 funds. This $1.4 billion is essentially a $350 million annual competitive grant program. I want to point out, as originally drafted, it was designed for electric vehicle charging and hydrogen vehicles through markup, in particular Fletcher of Texas. The bill now also includes natural gas and propane fueling infrastructure. ITSA's policy supports this as well. The bill requires the Department of Energy to provide guidance on deployment of alternative fuel infrastructure. And this is also an addition to the markup process. Also, it requires consideration of projects in freight corridors, near ports, and freight hubs. It makes hydrogen fuel, natural gas, propane eligible under Section 149, Title 23. And also another big win, I know a number of our members, but I really want to point out, call out California for this one. It really does expand EV charging, allows EV charging stations in interstate rest areas, interstate fringe or border parking facilities, and interstate park and ride facilities. So we hope and we believe this is the case, and especially look at the Senate side as well. The Senate EPW bill, there's a large alternative fuel vehicle charging program. We're moving in the right direction as a nation. So next slide. Okay, this is Amy's. I give her credit. I give Sherilyn Batt, our president and CEO, even more credit. We put MOD on the map in this town, and we did. So this bill, our policy is establishing a mobility on demand program for the new world of mobility. A safe, efficient, and modern transit system will be a key component in any successful implementation of MOD. That gets right to the point that we have to increase investment in transit. So this goes hand in hand. So just starting off quickly at the transit funding, it provides $77.7 billion over 5 years for transit, in particular key programs that will also support MOD. The Urbanized Area Formula Program will receive $35.7 billion. Formula Grants for Rural Areas Program will receive $4.9 billion. The Enhanced Mobility seniors and individuals with disabilities grants. I call it the paratransit program. Will receive 2.1 billion. MOD is now eligible. It was not before. It is now eligible under the urbanized area formula grants. It's eligible under the rural grant program. It's also eligible under the paratransit program, 5310. It does, it makes federal share for MOD and also MOS at 80%, unless the transit agency consults with a third party for mobility on demand service. And the federal share is reduced by 25%. I'm assuming that Amy spoke to that. We're going to work to increase the federal share on that issue. It retains basic requirements for safety, Buy America, and labor, all important issues. It also includes restrictions on single passenger trips and carbon and particulate emissions. It requires a negotiated rulemaking on an open data standard. I made it very clear to the committee we want to be active in that process. Workforce planning requirements, it does include that, and it applies workforce planning requirements to automated vehicle transit deployments as well as mobility on demand. We want to address the issue. We clearly recognize the importance of workforce planning. We had a conference call yesterday with our Smart Infrastructure Task Force. This is the infrastructure policy making body of ITS America, and there was strong support for automated vehicle transit deployments as an MOD, but also a clear recognition of the importance of workforce planning. Another big win, and we didn't think we had this. We have been pushing for over a year with the committee staff to make the MOD sandbox permanent, and we thought it was gone. At the last minute, we were told that includes $5 million per year for that. Also, shared mobility is eligible under CMAQ and also under MOD, which is another big win. So, and you should really look at our policy document. There's a lot of detail behind each one of these bullets. Okay, next slide. Okay, next slide deals with transportation technologies to reduce congestion, maintain congestion pricing programs to reduce congestion and raise revenue to support transportation improvements and improve trip time reliability. Priority for ITS America, it authorizes congestion pricing. We call for maintaining congestion pricing, subject to congestion and air quality impacts, planned investments to improve public transportation, environmental justice, equity impacts, impacts on freight movement, and economic impacts. It also establishes a projects of national regional significance program, which provides more than $9 billion with an average of $2.26 billion per year from 2022 to 2025 for large highway, transit, passenger, and freight rail projects that reduce congestion on roadways and don't quite fit neatly into existing programs. When we found out this program was coming, we made it very clear to the committee that we wanted to make sure that technology, ITS, VDI, is eligible, and it is. So again, that's important to recognize. There's a new $600 million community transportation investment grant program. This is designed to support local investments in projects to improve safety, state of good repair, accessibility, environmental quality. And again, ITS is eligible. The next one is a major technology program, and this is a 250 million gridlock reduction program. And so the catch in this is it's designed for metropolitan areas with populations over 1 million. And if you look at the bill language, it has a list of technology ITS requirements. And so again, another big win for ITS America as we look towards addressing gridlock congestion, and in this case, for this bill, in large cities, in metropolitan areas in the country. And this is a new one, establishes a pilot program to leverage anonymous real-time crowdsourced traffic data from third-party entities to improve transportation management capabilities. This came from Congressman Garrett Graves, again, of Louisiana. We had talked with his staff on Tuesday before the markup, did a review of the bill, felt like it was a very good bill. And so I think this provides some really quite interesting opportunities here. So again, the bill tackles congestion, and from our standpoint, it's really important to ITS America. It embraces technology to address the negative, the growing impacts of congestion across the country. Next slide. Okay, climate change, the bill, and this is not anything new, has been climate change is the focus of this legislation in many ways. ITSA's policy, and I want to call out MTC and San Francisco, the Bay Area. You guys have really led the way within ITS America on offering policy regarding transportation technologies to mitigate climate change. So the bill includes a new $8.3 billion carbon pollution reduction program with broad flexibility to reduce highway, transit, rail projects that will reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It also includes $25 million per year for community climate and innovation grants to reduce, again, greenhouse gas emissions. I'm looking down my notes because there's just so much detail here. Establishes a new pre-disaster mitigation program providing $6.2 billion to help prepare for and mitigate the impacts of climate change and extreme weather, including through natural infrastructure. I think that's through natural issues. That's probably an editing issue. And then, of course, the next one is establish a pre-disaster hazard mitigation program, term limited to 5 years, that gives states receiving emergency relief money over the previous 6 months a bonus equal to 5% of the amount to be used for resiliency activities. Again, this is a Graves amendment that came through markup, Garrett Graves, Louisiana. We looked at the bill. It includes technology in it, and again, I think from our standpoint, it's another good way to allow states and local communities to deploy technology to address climate change. Okay, next slide. Truck parking. I cannot tell you, this was one of the issues I heard over and over from Florida, Arizona, Michigan, California. It was probably every single one of our DOTs, and that was the need for a smart truck parking program. So this does that. It provides $250 million in FY23 for a grant program to address the shortage of parking for commercial motor vehicles to improve the safety of commercial motor vehicle drivers. Projects eligible include the use of intelligent transportation systems. That's the big point here. It would prohibit grant recipients for charging fees for CMV parking facilities created by the grants. This is the language that was included in the markup. So again, I want to point out, again, a win for ITS America, and I do want to highlight, again, our state DOTs that raised this issue for ITS America. Kevin Beastie, who actually included this in one of our policy documents, it's there now. So let's move on to the next slide. Okay, next steps. Well, so there's a lot more. There's big once language in this, in which I need to look closely. Speaking of dig once, if you didn't catch it, go back and look at the hearing video. And there was a suggestion by Congressman Pence of Indiana to add Chairman Pai of the FCC to the dig once task force. And Chairman DeFazio made it very clear he did not agree. He pointed to the FCC's actions, and you've heard this over and over from Tim and Bobby, of trying to give away the 75 megahertz for VDEX technology. And Chairman DeFazio made a passionate argument why that cannot happen. So I'm going to need to spend more time looking at dig once. As you know, a draft bill was sent around on Friday, looking for our feedback. That bill was included in the manager's amendment. I know Panasonic focused on adding intelligent transportation systems to that bill. I want to say that's in there. I know Texas DOT worked with the staff as well on that, and I will have more information on that. And also there's a rural broadband program that we are looking at. I think another great way to support broadband, in particular in rural communities. Of course, broadband is key to smart transportation. Next steps, this is going to happen quick. The bill now is going to become part of a larger 1.5 trillion infrastructure package. Interestingly, folks in the transportation community last week, it caught us by surprise. The bill number went from like, I think it was 7095 to 2. And the folks that understand the way Washington works is the single digit numbers are seen as leadership priority bills. And so when I saw that, I didn't quite understand why. Yesterday we found out why. So this bill, the transportation bill, will essentially be part of the infrastructure package that the speaker is probably announcing now. And so the markup, or I guess the floor vote, I should say, is scheduled for the week of June 29th. And the expectation is that this will clear the House by July 4th recess. So it's been a very busy month. I want to thank every one of you who is still here. And I was just told that the SU bill was unfortunately not included in its entirety in the manager's amendment. I know part of it was, but so that's why I didn't add it there, because I need to look at that bill in more detail. But it's been a long, very good couple of weeks. ITS said we were at the table throughout this entire process. Even this week, I've had multiple conversations with the committee staff, both the minority and the majority. We're not partisan here at ITS America. Also, discussions with ATA, discussions with our automakers, environmental groups over the week as well. Also, we are now beginning, I think Amy may have mentioned this, we're beginning to really focus on the Senate Banking Committee to try to find avenues to strengthen what we have with MOD. I think that we can do it. We're going to need your help. But I want to say thank you. I do want to apologize for the technical issues early on. I think we solved those issues. And are there any questions? Before I take questions, I do want to point out that this packet, this webinar, will actually be part of the board packet as well. And it will have much more detail, because what I need to do this weekend is continue to look through that bill. Must admit, I've had about 3 hours of sleep. Look through the bill and continue to build this out. After the board meeting, I will work with Laura Chase, our Chief Operating Officer, to make sure I can send the slides out to our Advocacy Trust members as well. So that's really it. Questions, comments, thoughts?
Thanks, Ron. That was a great discussion, and as you note, we've already been through the V2X update, and Amy did give her mobility on demand reaction. I did want to give Amy another chance to respond to anything that Ron covered in his presentation, and we do have a couple questions. So
no, let's turn to questions.
We'll go right.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's go right into questions. So we do have a question, Ron, and I think this one is mostly for you. What is the likelihood that the INVEST Act will pass before the FAST Act expires and/or before the national election? And I think, as you noted, the House is likely to pass the Invest in America Act as part of this infrastructure package this summer. Can you speak a little bit to kind of the prospects with conferencing with the Senate and on towards full passage?
Sure. Yeah, it's a great question. So I'm going to be kind of quick but thorough at the same time. So as Tim just mentioned, no doubt the bill will clear the House. The timing is right now. We're looking at the Senate side. I've had conversations with EPW. And in fact, I talked to EPW this week, and they are looking at July for some kind of action on ATIA, which is their bill that passed last summer. It's not quite clear what they're looking at, because I know there's been talk of actually putting that bill on the floor, but that would mean, well, what about the Senate Banking, Housing, Urban Affairs, Transit title? What does that mean with the Senate Commerce, Science, and Transportation title, which is really important to ITS America? That includes NHTSA's title, that includes technology, includes safety programs, includes freight programs. So what I'm hearing is that the other two committees, Commerce and Banking, will likely have a bill right after Labor Day. There's a chance it could move up, but it will be right after Labor Day. That will give essentially the month of September to mark up that bill, those two bills. The hope is that the Senate can have the three bills plus the finance title put together on the Senate floor before the end of September. Then we are at the end of September. We have an election in November. My feeling is this, and my conversations on the Hill is sort of leaning towards this, is that this will be a lame duck discussion. It will be perhaps a conference, and this is, I think, a positive outlook, and that's my job to make sure we get a bill done. And so what will happen potentially is in the lame duck, you will have the House bill, and then the Senate bill. Remember, the Senate bill will include the 4 titles, and it will be conference. And it's interesting, I was looking back over the my first reauthorization was Safety Law in 2005. And when I look at the history of the reauthorization bills, I am a firm believer that the House has had more influence than the Senate. Now, this is different because this has been, and again, when I engage in the politics of this, because that's not my job and that's not what we do at RTS America. But because the House bill is seen as just a Democrat's bill, I don't know how that will impact conference. Now, clearly, they will go to conference with the leverage of being the House bill. But the question is what happens? Because what will happen at conference is both Republicans and Democrats of all the committees will assign members to that conference. And if the House Republicans feel as if they were not part of the House process, there's a chance that the House Republicans could line up more on the Senate side, where it was more seen as more of a bipartisan process. So my theory is this, it could be a good shot of getting a bill done in lame duck, but everything's gonna have to come together at the same time. And if that doesn't happen, we're starting all over in a new Congress in Tim?
Thanks, Ron. And we have another question that came in. This will again go to you. And this is about the process for the House bill, basically from here through the floor vote. So do we have information on when the infrastructure package, including the Invest in America Act, will go before the Rules Committee? And do we understand whether the Rules Committee will consider any amendments or issue allow amendments to be considered on the floor, or if there will be a closed rule or some limited aspect? Obviously, when you add the surface transportation bill into a larger infrastructure package, that certainly is a priority for the speaker, it seems at this point, that changes the dynamic on the floor. So if you could speak to that.
Yeah, that's a good one. So it's a very tight turnaround. My understanding, I have not really been able to focus on the exact process that the Rules Committee will take, but it's my understanding that starts today. I know, for example, Melanie with Texas DOT has been following it closely. But I think that Rules is going to act very quick. And then we're looking at having this bill, the infrastructure bill, on the floor again the last week of June. I don't have the honest details of how that's going to play out. The fact is this is a speaker priority bill now. And I think that makes it very difficult. And I've talked to Amy about this because we want to improve on some of the MOD language. Again, I think we've been very successful with MOD. We want it all. But I think it's going to be very difficult to improve on MOD with this now being a speaker priority bill. This thing's going to move quickly through the House. She has the votes to move this quickly. But as far as amendments, I don't have, we just finished this markup last night at 11 o'clock, Tim, and I'll be honest with you, you're not moving. Can you hear me? Can you hear me, Tim?
Yep, I can hear you.
Okay, you're frozen, so I'm not sure how much I've got through on that.
It all came through.
Okay, good. All right. So again, we don't know the process. What I'm going to do this weekend, because of course I need to be able to explain this to the board at our retreat next week. I'm going to make calls to my contacts on the Hill and get a better understanding of what their game plan is. But again, the point that I want to make here is this is a priority bill now. This is not just a regular fast act reauthorization. This is a priority bill for the speaker. It's part of her larger priority infrastructure package. And I think that's gonna, and I think adding amendments or really changing text in any fundamental way would be very difficult.
All right, thank you, Ron. And we do have one final question that I received. Were there wins for vehicle to everything technology in Invest in America Act? I know, Ron, you spoke a little bit to vehicle to pedestrian technologies and that sort of thing. I will say from my perspective, the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, while very supportive of our efforts on the 5.9 gigahertz band, they don't have jurisdiction over spectrum issues, so it is difficult for them to address it directly. We do continue to work with the Senate Commerce Committee, which has jurisdiction over some transportation issues in addition to spectrum issues. And as Ron mentioned, they have yet to finish their titles, so there's a possibility there. Ron, is there anything that you'd like to add regarding V2X?
I would, and I'm looking down at my computer right now, my other computer. I think it's a tremendous set of wins for V2X. One, V2P is in, and we had to work hard to get V2P in this bill. As folks who followed this last year know, we worked hard to get V2P eligible in the EPW bill, and that was not successful. We're working hard to get it eligible in the Commerce Committee bill. We're having good conversations with the Commerce Committee, and I hope that we will be successful there. It is eligible. With the increase in pedestrian and bike-related fatalities in this country, which is really going off the charts. Now, a state or local community can use this funding for V2X technology. And so that's huge. The other win is when I look at, and this is what I was looking at, all of the new grant programs. And my quick count is 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, at least 10. Maybe there are more than 10, but my quick count. You have at least 10 new grant programs that will total billions of dollars that V2X is not eligible. And again, I think that's a huge win for ITS America. We also want to point out that V2X continues to be eligible under the core program. So all the hard-fought efforts in 2015 to make it eligible, that is there still. So I want to point out from my standpoint, I think it was a win. You know, I can tell you this, look at DeFazio's statements, or watch what he said on Tuesday, I believe it is, Wednesday, I believe it is now, on V2X. It's clear to me, he understands the urgency behind this. It's clear to me that he wants to help us. It's clear to me also that Graves, the ranking member, Sam Graves, they're looking for ways to help us. They don't have the jurisdiction. They would have needed a waiver from the Energy and Commerce Committee to get this in the bill, and that is not going to happen. Now, our hope is this. This is the long game. This is why we have to just stay completely engaged in this process. We cannot stop, even if we think this is not going to happen. We have to stay engaged. If there's a chance that the Senate Commerce Committee can get 5.9, 75 full megahertz, full 75 megahertz in their bill, and we know that Senator Cantwell is quite interested in helping us. The board sat down with her in March for an hour meeting on our reauthorization platform, and of that hour, 45 minutes for V2X, 5.9, a high level of understanding of this complicated issue. So I think that, and I do know that we have Senator Peters, Michigan. I sense there are other members that want to help us. Also, I do want to point out, I'm not sure if Tim referenced this or not, we're holding meetings with the full Commerce Committee. Carlos Braceras of Utah, the executive director of the Utah DOT, was on a call with GM, Ford, Toyota, and Audi just last week, making a strong case to Senator Lee's staff of the importance of preserving the 5.9 band. We've talked with a number of other offices as well, including Rosen in Nevada. So we have to fight. Let's get it in the Senate Commerce Bill, because if we get in the Commerce Bill, we have life, because that means it's going to conference. And at conference,
Yep.
Tim, I know we got to get at conference, that means it's a whole new ballgame, because at conference you have the Energy and Commerce Committee, you have T&I, you have the Science, Space and Technology Committee. So who knows what can come out of that conversation. So that's it on that point. I'm optimistic.
Thanks for that, Ron. And we're a couple minutes over our time, so I'm going to end it here. Just wanted to say once again, thank you to all the members that were able to join us today for this Federal Policy Update webinar. Thank you, Ron, for walking us through the Invest in America Act, and Amy for talking specifically to some of the Mobility on Demand Alliance provisions. And thank you again to the membership for joining us today. And with that, we'll close the webinar.
Great, thank you.